Thank you very much for this introduction, and thanks everybody for joining today, despite a tough competition from the European football match. So let me now share the slides and start talking a little bit about this IPCC special report on climate change and land. And thank you also, Ingrid, for your introduction. This report was produced 2 years ago. It was approved in 2019, 8 August. I was part of this report. I was a coordinating lead author of the chapter on desertification, about which I will also talk today. So this report was, okay. So the short name of this report is IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land, but it has a, with any UN bureaucratic process, it has a long name as well. Climate change, desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, food security, greenhouse gas fluxes in terrestrial ecosystems. So that's the full name, but it's usually well known as the Land Report, Climate Change and Land Report. This report was also unique for IPCC. Probably everybody knows IPCC. IPCC is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is the intergovernmental panel which brings together periodically all the many scientists from around the world who look at the literature on climate change and all the literature related to climate change, and then provide reports on particular issues or broadly summarizing all the literature on climate change that are then used by governments for their actions, decisions regarding climate. It also informs the negotiations and discussions under the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. So this report is a special report. Special means it is not it's part of the cycle. There are cycles of IPCC reports. It's part of the cycle of the ongoing current cycle, but then it's not the main report of the working groups. You know, IPCC has 3 working groups on physical science of climate change, on vulnerability impacts, and on mitigation, basically, if I simplify. So 3 working groups, they are now producing their main reports. But this report is a special report which was produced together by these 3 working groups on this specific topic of land, food systems, land management. This report was also in some way very special for IPCC, several first things happening here. For the first time, the number of female CLAs. So a CLA means coordinating lead author. These are the people who are managing chapters, leading teams which are writing the chapters. So almost half of the CLAs were female. So far, it was mostly dominated to a large extent by male scientists. There were more than half of the authors coming from developing countries. So 53% of authors coming from developing countries. So this was also the first time when the majority of authors were coming from developing countries rather than, say, from high-income countries of a global north. Altogether, 107 authors working during 3 years. It started in 2007 and sometime 2006, 2007, and then ended in 2009. Altogether, it looked through, so the scientists who wrote the report went through more than 7,000 scientific publications and assessed their information and quality. And as you know, with any IPCC report, it was peer-reviewed. So there are several stages of peer review. First review by experts, second review by governments and experts. So altogether, and then before that, internal review. So you could imagine during these 3 stages of review, about 30,000 review comments, 30,000 review comments for all the report. Each chapter got something like 4,000 or 5,000 comments. So exactly these are the names of the chapters, 7 chapters, starting from overall introduction and framing, and then land and climate interactions, which looked really at the climate science part, so atmospheric science, climate science, and how this affects, how climate change affects processes on the land. And then the chapter where I was together with a colleague coordinating was called chapter on desertification. There was another chapter on land degradation, food security. Chapter number six, in some way summarized. So it's a synthetic chapter. It looked at the other chapters and then looked into the interlinkages between desertification, land degradation, and also looked at the solutions at the interface of these three topics. And chapter 7 looked at the risk management. So what are the risks coming from climate change and what needs to be done about those risks? So what is new in this report compared to other previous reports of the IPCC? First of all, it has a more integrated analysis, especially regarding land and food. So it looks at multiple, both direct and indirect drivers of natural resource management around food, water, and energy. It also looks at land degradation from a human food security perspective and refers to the strong correlations, strong links between land degradation and poverty. It looks at incentives related to markets, institutions for sustainable land management, and also links all this to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and climate change adaptation and mitigation. So integrated look around land and food systems was one of the distinguishing features of this report. So if you ask me, what are the three messages I could carry with me, which are very easy kind of talking points? These are these three. Land is under growing human pressure. So human activities are putting growing big pressure on land. But land is part of the solution. Land is not a part of the problem, it's part of the solution. It's our ally, friend. But land cannot do it if we don't help it. Land can't do it all. So human societies, we need to undertake some actions so that we help land, and also land helps us with our food, with climate mitigation, with many achievement of many other sustainable development goals. Now, coming to the land under pressure. So look, you can see from this figure, nowadays about 75%, about 3/4 of all global ice-free land surface area is under human direct or indirect use. Yeah. There are only maybe 1/4 of the global land, mostly made up of, maybe deserts, barren areas, so where human activities have natural barriers. So they are kind of remain under natural conditions. But most of the land area, 75, 3/4, you can say, is managed sometimes quite intensively by human activities. You can see here irrigated cropland infrastructure, irrigated croplands, and non-irrigated cropland about 12%, pastures, savannas, extensive pastures about 7%, plantation forests 2%. So this is the last area, so 28%, so 1/3, 3/4. So these are estimates. So these are kind of natural ecosystems where human interference is relatively no human interference or small. Of course, nowadays we cannot say that there are ecosystems which has no human interference at all, but in terms of direct use or interference. Some of the pressures on land that the report highlights strongly are related to agriculture and food production and their consequences. You can see from this figure, I think I can use, let me use annotation tools. Here you can see agricultural production. This number one, inorganic fertilizer use, compared to 1961, it increased by 8 times. And cereal yields also increased by 2 times, doubled. Irrigation water volume, so irrigation water used, increased by, so it's doubled. Cereal use increased by 200%, before previous one. Total number of ruminant livestock, so almost increased by 60–70%. That's on the supply side. What's happening on the demand side? Food demand. Population is increasing, so by 150% during the last 50 years. Prevalence of overweight and obesity is also increasing, but almost doubled. Total calorie production per capita is increasing, didn't double, but prevalence of underweight is going down. So that's the kind of a positive story. Prevalence of underweight is going down. On the land side, but all this huge explosion, if you like, on production, agricultural production, food demand, food consumption, cannot just go without consequences on the ecosystems. And first and foremost, this is about land. So you can see from this area that the area where experiencing desertification, so population in areas experiencing desertification doubled. It's population in areas experiencing desertification, but actual area of desertification also increased. Dryland areas in drought annually are increasing. Of course, there are fluctuations, but you can see the overall trend is upwards. So every year, area in drylands which is experiencing drought is increasing by 1%. Let's say before 10 years ago, only 30% of dryland areas experienced drought in any given year. After 10 years, that number increased by 10%. Inland wetland extent is decreasing. So inland wetlands are dried, including for agricultural use or by climatic factors. It can be also as well. So what is the link between climate change and land? So report highlights climate change exacerbates land degradation. Land degradation is also a driver of climate change through emissions of greenhouse gases and reduced carbon uptake. Gross emissions, so from agriculture, forestry, and other land use, make up about 1/3 of total global emissions. So about 1/3, 30% of all global greenhouse gas emissions is because we need to eat. So our food is causing about 30% of global emissions. Land accounts for 61% of anthropogenic methane emissions. 50% of the nitrogen applied to agricultural land is not taken up by crops, resulting in nitrous oxide emissions. So these are the facts which highlight strongly the importance of land and food systems as part of the climate action and climate question. So this is a bit of a complicated figure, so let me take a bit time to explain it. And then because if you can read this figure, then you can get a lot of information in one go, because it's a very synthetic figure. So this is something called reasons for concern, or in colloquially, it's called burning embers. So when you are burning coal, at the end, there are some embers. So it's compared to that, and then it's called burning embers because it has similar kind of color diagram patterns. So what it says, on the vertical axis, you have temperature increase compared to pre-industrial levels, so around 1850 to 1900s. So compared to that, so as the temperature is growing, these bars showing the change in risks to different ecosystems. So here, when you have here on the right corner, when you have a white color, it means you cannot detect impacts. There are no impacts. We cannot see that climate change is having any impact on. Yellow, moderate impact. Risk, as it goes red, purple, deep red, and then purple, risks are increasing. At high levels, you have millions of people affected. At very high levels, you have global widespread impacts, irreversible impacts. Yeah, I cannot see the chat, but probably we will come back. If there are questions, we will come back to those questions at the end. So, for example, this dryland water scarcity now, so we are now here about 1 degree increase, slightly more than 1 degree increase of global surface temperatures compared to pre-industrial conditions. So already for water scarcity, we can see that we are in moderate risk territory. If you go for all of these dimensions, we are already in moderate risk territory: soil erosion, vegetation loss, wildfire damage, permafrost. But now UNFCCC wants to limit climate change by 2 degrees Celsius. So it's here. So you can see it's not good enough. Wildfire damage, we are already in high risk category. High risk means global, big consequences. Permafrost degradation, we are approaching very high irreversibility at 2 degrees, and especially taking into account that some of this literature behind this may be underestimating these risks, then it's a bit of a, so permafrost degradation, permafrost is the frozen, you can say frozen methane in Siberia or northern polar areas. So if permafrost starts melting, it starts giving out a lot of methane into the atmosphere, and there you can have runaway climate change, very rapid. So beyond 2 or 2.5 degrees, you reach the point of purple, which means irreversible. And then you can have big additional methane releases to the atmosphere because of permafrost degradation. So in all of these dimensions, even 1.5 degrees that we are now targeting, now the global community kind of settled, okay, we need to avoid 1.5 degrees, already proposed, already make up moderate risks, sometimes even high risks. But this is where we are. We are already 1%. I don't want to be a bit too alarmistic, but it appears that we are booked for 1.5 degrees. Of course, it depends a lot on our actions, but that's the summary. So behind this figure, there are hundreds and hundreds of papers. Yeah, so it's a kind of qualitative summary of this information in those papers. Now, let me talk a little bit more about specific chapters and their findings. Chapter on desertification and land degradation. So now there's, according to different estimates, from 1.5 billion to 3.2 billion people live in areas affected with land degradation globally, which are about 1/4 or 1/3 of the total land area. So about 500 million of these are in drylands. So those areas, I will talk about drylands, those areas which have strong water scarcity. So about 9% of drylands are experiencing desertification. Since 1961, the annual area of drylands in drought has increased by slightly more than 1% per year. I talked about it earlier. So, and then this trend is continuing. Although there is no this global trend in aridity, it's not that everywhere, you know, sometimes you get a little bit journalistic impression that from media that deserts are expanding, and maybe after 30 years, if we don't nothing, maybe there will be deserts in Germany or even some. So these kind of stories are a little bit exaggerated. There is no global trend in aridity. We cannot, but definitely in some areas, aridity is increasing. In some areas, it may be decreasing. So there is this kind of change in aridity situations. Soil erosion with conventional tillage, conventional agriculture is 100 times higher than rate at which soil is formed. So soil erosion using conventional tillage methods is very unsustainable. Now, so this is the map, a bit of drylands. So let me now explain a little bit what is difference between desertification and land degradation, because if you read some reports in this area, or a lot of confusion. Land degradation is a generic term. Land degradation is a loss of biological productivity, value to humans, or ecosystem functionality everywhere in the world. Yeah. So land degradation is a generic term. Desertification is land degradation in drylands, those areas which are shown in color here, where you have more or less evaporation, where you have water scarcity, if I summarize in non-technical terms, where you have much less rain falling than evaporating every year. So these are the drylands. So you have hyper-arid drylands, like basically deserts, you know, these red areas, arid land, semi-arid, dry subhuman. So as you are going from red to more yellow color, rainfall is increasing. So all these areas are called drylands, and desertification is land degradation in drylands. Desertification is not a process of becoming a desert. It's not when something becomes a desert, it's called desertification. It's a bit confusing, yeah, but that's how the modern terminology is used. Deserts are not kind of trash bins of ecosystems when these are the totally degraded areas. No. Deserts are valuable ecosystems by themselves. They contain a very rich endemic biodiversity, which is adapted to those conditions. So deserts are ecosystems like any other ecosystem, like forest, like tundra, like savanna. They are ecosystems of their own, on their own, with their own value. They are not kind of a degraded ecosystem. They are not degraded forests. They have their own. Desertification is not a process of becoming desert. Desertification is a land degradation. When we have any form of land degradation, like secondary salinization, soil erosion, in these dryland areas. So I already kind of touched on these definitions. So I will just move on. So why land degradation is a driver of climate change? Because through emissions of greenhouse gases and reduced rates of carbon sequestration uptake. So deforestation, for example, is a type of form of land degradation. When we are cutting down forests, they are not sucking up all this carbon from the atmosphere. And then it's contributing to greenhouse gas emission, to climate change. On the other hand, global warming has already caused observed change in two drivers of land degradation, two causes of land degradation. So rainfall intensity and heat stress. Yeah. So heavy precipitation, when you have especially this kind of sloping areas, when there is a increased, instead of falling uniformly, rainfall starts falling very fast in one single event, and then it creates floods, and then starts washing away soils, creates soil erosion, these deep gullies. And so that's really a cause of land degradation, and also increased heat stress, which is causing loss of vegetation, eventually may be leading to land degradation in that area. So loss of vegetation already by itself, when vegetation productivity, biological productivity is decreasing. So that is land degradation. So it's already now at 1 degree increase. Going forward, it may become even worse, increasing floods, drought frequency and severity, All these outcomes will start affecting land condition. And of course, how you manage land will play an important role in adapting and coping with these changes. Drylands now cover about half of the global land, 46%, and about half are home to about 3 billion people. On average, drylands are greening, so more vegetation. So it's not that everywhere becoming desertified, degraded. No. Drylands on average are greening. One of the reasons for that, if you want to dig deeper, is more carbon in the atmosphere. So when more carbon atmosphere is increasing vegetation growth. But also, of course, you have specific areas across the dryland which are experiencing intensive desertification. Greening in some areas is a kind of a false land improvement. It's greening, but if you go to that place, you can see that actual conditions are getting worse. For example, across big areas in Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, for example, you observe greening. But this greening is caused by bush encroachment to grasslands. So unpalatable, those bushes which livestock cannot eat, may be poisonous. They are growing fast and then spreading. When you look from the satellite, it appears, oh, it's greening. But if you go down, you can see that herders no longer can graze their livestock in that area because that instead of good grass for livestock, there you have thorny bushes. In some countries, we have intensive use of fertilizers. So when you're using a lot of fertilizer, it may appear green, cropland, looks nice from the satellite. But once you stop applying that fertilizer, no longer that land can support good harvest it used to perhaps before being degraded. So major drivers of human drivers of desertification are expansion of croplands, unsustainable land management, increased pressure on land from population growth. Climate change will increase this desertification risks, and then will decrease all provision of dryland ecosystem services. Lower ecosystem health, including will result in biodiversity loss. Desertification and climate change also have very direct relationship with SDGs. Here you can see different levels of impacts based on qualitative assessment. So you can see here, low level of confidence means how confident are we in these findings. For example, if there's only one paper talking about that, then we cannot be confident. Maybe that paper got it wrong. We don't know. Or if there are 3 papers or 4 papers, but 2 of them saying one thing and 2 others are saying just the opposite of that, then we also cannot be confident. So this is one of the ways how IPCC assesses literature. But if there are 100 papers and all of them saying the same thing, then we have absolute high confidence. So from that perspective, you can see that impacts on poverty, desertification, climate change, when they are coming together, we are highly confident that they will have high impacts. Yeah, length of the bar. They will have high impacts on poverty, high impacts on hunger, high impacts on land conditions, of course, and high impacts on climate change. We also have kind of high confidence, slightly high, but sufficiently high confidence that it will affect gender equality or clean water situation. But let's say how land degradation would affect, let's say, sustainable cities and communities. Potential impact is big, but we are not confident. Or peace, justice, and strong institutions. Potential impact is big, medium, you can see here, but we are not confident. This really refers specifically as well to situation with conflicts. if you are into the topic, there's a lot of discussion. Does climate change cause conflicts? Does land degradation cause conflicts? And usually media or some international organizations just run with this message that, oh, there is, with climate change, there will be lots of conflicts. Potentially, there is a potential, but there is no evidence, strong evidence for that. We don't have much confidence on that kind of causality yet. Desertification exacerbates also climate change through changes in vegetation cover, sand and dust aerosols. This is one of the weak spots of global climate modeling, how sand and dust aerosols affect climate. But impacts can be very big. Climate change can either reduce, according to some models, by 70% of these dust storms, sandstorms, or increase them by 300%. So that's a big range. And then these changes in sand and dust aerosols could have huge implications on global climate. But current models do not fully comprehensively capture those processes yet. A lot of technological solutions are available for land degradation, like water harvesting, micro irrigation, agroforestry, and so on. This list can be very, very long. But the issue is that the adoption rates are low. We have the technologies. It's not that we need to urgently start developing something. No. We have the technologies. They are available. They were tested, but they are not applied in big areas. So that's the problem. Economics is also strongly pointing out that sustainable land management makes economic sense. Every dollar you invest into restoring degraded lands in sustainable land management gives back from $3 to $6 of return between 5 to 30 years, depending on where you look and what kind of land restoration you do. Indigenous local knowledge can contribute positively to enhancing resilience against climate change and desertification. Sustainable land management also contributes to addressing desertification and also mitigating and adapting climate change. So it's cheaper to prevent desertification than, let's say, allow it to happen and then come back later and then start restoring it. Many of the response options which help land to be used sustainably, to be managed sustainably, are also good for climate, are also help with climate change mitigation and adaptation. Many of them contribute to something we call land degradation neutrality. So it's one of the, if you are aware with activities of UNCCD, so that's one of the objectives of UNCCD to achieve land degradation neutrality. So that means when you are not degrading new land anymore, if you are degrading any land, you are compensating it by restoring any other degraded land. So all these measures that contribute to land degradation neutrality, contribute to SLM, sustainable land management, can help with climate change as well. This report reviewed many of these kind of solutions. What are their impacts? Can they help? What are their synergies? Do they have some side effects, something bad effects? Maybe we don't know. So like in agriculture, increased food productivity, agroforestry, agricultural diversification, and so on, in forests, soils, other ecosystems, but also related to value chain management, reducing post-harvest losses, dietary change, livelihood diversification, and so on. And the report finds that many of these responses, that land-related responses that contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation, can also help improve food security. But then there are limits to application of these land-based mitigation measures, for example, bioenergy crops or afforestation. If we start afforesting everywhere, yeah, one challenge, plant trees on 100 million hectares, or another challenge, plant trees on that has good objectives, but we need to be careful where we do it. There is reforestation and afforestation. Reforestation is when you are planting trees where there was already forests. recently and it was cut down. Afforestation means you are planting trees somewhere where there was no forest at all. It's a completely new ecosystem. So afforestation should not lead to destruction of ecosystems. So if it's a well-functioning savanna and you start planting dense forest there, it's it may not be an ideal solution because savannas also the ecosystems on their own. Or if you are planting, if you want to grow only by energy crops everywhere, then it reduces food production. That's also bad for food security. So this report used this kind of metrics to measure these different potential impacts. Impacts could be positive or negative, large or moderate. So large, and then this dimension: mitigation, adaptation, is it desertification, land degradation, food security. So you can see here, let's say large mitigation effect would be more than 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Adaptation positive for more than 25 million people, and so on. So very specific kind of, and also they accounted for costs a bit qualitatively because lack of data. And so this was the metrics. Now let's look what are some results. So what agriculture, increased food productivity, agroforestry. Let's look at these two examples. So mitigation effects, large. Yeah, look, this color, large color, deep blue color, large effect. So that means we have more than 3 gigatons equivalent of carbon dioxide sequestered per year through increased productivity or avoided. Increased productivity, and agroforestry helps with sequestering or avoiding the release of about 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide. But we have low confidence for increased productivity. So low confidence means not enough evidence in the literature or contradicting evidence. But regarding agroforestry, we have medium confidence. Medium confidence is a good, sufficiently high confidence level. Adaptation also big impacts. Here we have medium confidence on both, that it's helpful. Desertification, low confidence and medium confidence. All these dimensions, increased food productivity, agroforestry have large impacts, large food security impacts. Cost can be cheap, not that expensive for agroforestry. For increased food productivity, it's so diverse, we don't know. Yeah. So food security, high confidence. Yeah. For example, increased food productivity, how it affects, increased food productivity, how it affects food security, positively, large, very large impact, and high confidence. And so on for other aspects, forest and soils, ecosystem, fire management, restoration, reduced conversion of coastal wetlands. So you can see in all cases, they are positive across all of these dimensions. Extent of how positive can be slightly vary. Our confidence levels vary, but we know that they are positive. Now let's look at another example of reforestation and forest restoration. Good for mitigation, good for adaptation, good for desertification, good for land degradation, bad for food security. There's a trade-off. So if you were using land for producing crops, now you are returning that land through reforestation, planting trees, then you have less land for producing crops. That affects negatively food security. But if you are doing it at large scale, if you are doing it large scale means we are talking about, let's say, 10 gigatons of carbon removal per year. A large scale afforestation could, when this report was doing this modeling, large scale means you start planting new trees on the territory, let's say equal to territory of India. That's large scale. Then you can have global food security complications. But if you are doing it at smaller scales, then no problem. Mostly small but positive effects. Afforestation, similarly, you see food security implication even worse than with reforestation. when you have afforestation, planting trees in new places. What are the other solutions? Land use zoning and integrated landscape planning, payment for ecosystem services. So a lot of the degradation is happening because many of the ecosystem services provided by land do not have prices, market values. Like, for example, land helps with nutrient management, with carbon regulation, with water purification. We know that food you produce in land has a price. Nowadays, maybe you can try with carbon, although not from I'm not aware of many agricultural kind of land engaged in carbon trading. So as a result, private land users don't benefit from maintaining those ecosystem services. Land gets degraded, and if you make payments for ecosystem services, that can help with sustainable land management. And other measures like providing access to markets, extension advisory services, empowering women, secure land tenure, promoting collective action. And what is a more generic and generally important point is we need to reflect the environmental cost of land degrading agricultural practices. So we need to, we need to know what is the true cost of our food, what is the true cost in terms of environment, or it can also incur in terms of health. But here emphasis in this chapter was on environment. What is the true cost of our food? What kind of environmental losses we are incurring? But not everything can be fixed. Yeah, so those solutions are good, but not everything can be fixed. Some changes could be irreversible. When desertification results in complete loss of land productivity, adaptation options are limited. Some of that forms of land degradation, we don't have much kind of put big walls around all the coastlines of the world, or thawing permafrost. We can do nothing about thawing permafrost if temperatures increase certain degrees. And also there are limits to capacity of land system to act as carbon sink. Mature vegetation and soil carbon reservoirs reach saturation points at some point. So, and even when we are planting trees now one of the important aspects that measures that is used to cope to mitigate climate change is by reforestation, afforestation. So plant trees, plant more trees. That's an excellent idea, but it may not help with climate change in the short term. If we need to act in the next 3 to 5 or 10 years to avoid trees planting, will help in a very small way, because young trees do not sequester a lot of carbon. It will take maybe 50, 60 years before those trees reach their full sequestration potential. Yeah, so we need to take that into account. Just by planting trees, we cannot escape from dangerous climate change anymore. Of course, they will help. Maybe we will, at some point, we are planting trees and then we are exceeding for a brief time 2 degrees. And then once trees start working more, sequestering more carbon, we dip back again under 2 degrees. That's kind of a scenario. But if we are reaching 2 degrees increase in the next 10 years, planting trees now will help in a very small way. So overall, we have enough knowledge to take action. Many sustainable land management actions make strong economic sense. And then there's a lot of things we can do now, right away: capacity building, technology transfer, these financial mechanisms, payments for ecosystem services, monitoring of land degradation, early warning systems, and so on. So Better land management can play its part in tackling climate change, but it can't do it all. It cannot solve all the problems, but it's essential piece of the puzzle. Better land management is important for climate change mitigation, but perhaps even more important for sustainable livelihoods, for food security, for SDGs. So what is the big picture? I'm concluding my slides. What is the big picture from this report and related to land and food systems? Agricultural emissions should be included in the mainstream discussion about climate policy. And I think this report has already kind of I don't dare say impact, but probably influence. It already had an influence on global national discussions about the role of food systems. We're now having food system summits, which also will touch on these issues. Many governments across the world, in Europe, are thinking seriously about limiting agricultural emissions. Acting early will avert or minimize risks, reduce losses, and generate return on investment. So it's better to act earlier than wait for more time. It's important to measure progress, if we are achieving those goals or not. And then all the solutions need to be guided through flexible, adaptive approaches. They're not kind of the same way imposed everywhere. They need to be specified to local context and local situations. So these are my discussion points for today. This report is about, what, 300 pages. So, and there are so many different things there. If you don't have time to read all the 300 pages, you can read what they call summary for policymakers. Yeah, there you have a very, this is about maybe 20 pages or 25 pages. There you have a kind of summarized version of the report, but that summary is a kind of a political document, more or less. If you really want to go to the details, you better read something called technical summary, where you have more information about the technical aspects of the report. But of course, if you want to read the entire thing, then you will have the full wealth of 7,000 papers summarized for you in these reports. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.